Okay, we'll call to order. Welcome. Welcome board members and our staff and public. Are we live? I think we're recording. Okay. Calling to order the Utah State Board of Education legislative meeting, February 13th, 2023. And want to acknowledge this is being held in a hybrid capacity with the anchor location at USBE offices. We have joining us on Zoom, I believe, members Green, Carey, Booth, and Davis. So let's go through the roll call. See who's here. Member Bogus. Member Booth.
I'm here.
Member Klein. Do we have Member Klein? Not yet. Do we know if she was joining by Zoom or in person?
I'll text her.
Okay. Member Davis.
Here.
Member Earl.
Here.
Member Green. Member Green? Not with us yet. Member Hart?
Here.
Member Hymas? Here. Member Carey?
Here.
Member Lear?
Here.
Member Norton?
Here.
Member Reel?
Here.
Member Straight?
Here.
Member Wood?
Here.
And Member Moss is here. Okay.
Chair
So we
Moss,
do-
I'm here. This
Is that Member Green? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So thank you for attending another special meeting. We've been in very productive open discussions with legislative leadership, and we discussed last Thursday some ideas that were proposed by legislative leadership. We had a chance to discuss but not weigh in. And so we're here to consider possible action. We can take any number of different actions. We don't have to limit ourselves to one. People can consider, vote on, approve for recommendation, whatever the body feels strongly about. And so we're, again, it's not necessarily an either or, but wanted to bring forward board members' action items for consideration. And I think we're going to have Deputy Jones, were you going to weigh in a little bit on the current status? We had, I'll just say we had a couple of meetings at the invitation of leadership after our last board meeting. Had a meeting with Speaker Brad Wilson from the House, and then some members joined Senator Milner as well, I think this morning. So we greatly appreciate the dialogue and opportunity to weigh in. And we've had discussions both about constitutional language and then about statutory language. The proposals that came from the legislative leadership that we discussed last time had statutory guarantees contingent on constitutional language. So that's an important element to consider. Again, board members can propose and approve for recommendation either or both constitutional or statutory terms. We have in backup two that came in prior to the meeting from Finance Chair Norton and also from Member Wood. So I think everybody had an opportunity to review those. So we've got Deputy Jones, Brian Quisenberry, our Assistant Attorney General, and I think, yes, Angie Stallings, our Deputy Superintendent of Policy for any questions. But Deputy Jones, did you want to weigh in on any of the current developments?
No, Deputy Superintendent of Operations Scott Jones. No, Chair, you covered it really well. We just wanted to make sure for value add that all board members are oriented to the board memo itself or the agenda memo itself, where we try to show the timeline and then where you left off on February 2nd with your motions, both for the constitutional piece and for the statutory piece. So you can see your last action items that you sent in the memo itself. I think that's important to just remind yourselves of where you were leaving the February 2nd meeting, then to Chair Moss's timeline as well. You know, there's been subsequent meetings with select legislators, legislative representation, so to speak, he described that really well. So we are at the point where we're at now. So any questions or concerns, Chair, we can take those as they come.
So, okay, any questions at this point for Deputy Jones? Let me just recap then what the board did previously. We recommended the legislature provide a WP value of 60,000 or more by 2027, fund at least a 6% increase to the value of WPU during times of economic growth before increasing funding to any other subcommittee budget or line item education appropriation, continue HB 357. That part I understand is part of the legislature's proposal as well. Set aside funds per year to ensure sustainment of public education education funding to prior year funding levels for up to 5 years when there are periods of recession, negative growth, and/or declines in personal income averages, and to reallocate any decline in the number of WPU to the value of the WPU. Restrict the number of public education bills in each session by setting an early deadline for public education bills or by limiting the number allowed to be reviewed and prioritizing WPU funding over grants and line item appropriations. And last, tie % increase in personal income to increase in public education funding and provide inflationary factors to certified tax rates. The legislative proposals were to, let's see, I'm trying to find the statutory part here. Come on. Brother, I thought it was right there. Sorry. I'm having, you have that, Vice Chair Hart? Yeah, I thought it was. Sorry, then we can open the floor. Just wanted to restate what the legislative leadership proposed, and it should be right there. Oh, brother. Do you have that, Chair Norton, in terms of what?
It's on the screen, right there.
There we go. Yeah, I just, my connection froze. So I was trying to find what the legislature had proposed for statutory terms. That's the constitutional terms. Statutory from the legislature. No, it's in there. It's not in that though. That's just the constitutional part.
Which one's
Down below, it says,
Those were our own. Those are the ones I just read. Those were our last proposals. I'm looking for the legislative proposals for statute, which I thought were now in the backup. I'm sorry. Let's see. Where did that end up, Sybil? Do you have it, Member Straight? Okay. Yes, there we go. Thank you. All right, I got it. So the legislature proposed to fund a 6% WPU increase for FY24, statutorily guaranteed contingent on the passage of the constitutional amendment that the legislature will provide additional increases to the WPU value by rolling in the savings in the minimum school program from declining enrollment for fiscal years 2026 to 2030 and freeze enrollment number for 5 years. So those are the statutory proposals that have been put forward. And we discussed, I think, in some detail, the constitutional provisions that were suggested by the legislature for our recommendation last time. So with that background, the floor is open for a proposed action. Chair Norton had a proposed motion in the backup. I see lights from Member Lear and from Member Lear.
I had a question that took me a minute to formulate for Scott Jones.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry to take you backwards.
No,
but,
no.
So Scott, one of my problems with a lot of the language that's being proposed and some of which I like in part and don't like in part, but one of the concerns I have are the terms that are not adequately defined or firm. So just to give an example as an illustration, help me understand the word stabilization. I can't remember if it's in these or if it's in one that's coming or whatever. So in my mind, the plain meaning, I'm not an economist. in my mind, the plain meaning of stabilization is stabilized as related to something. And if we try to take it into this context, is it stabilized as of 2009? Is it stabilized in this great year of 2023? Is it stabilized in a recession year, 2007? I'm wrestling, if that's a term of art that finance people use or economists use, then I'd be more persuaded. But that's one of my really base problems with all the language that's circulated. And that's just an example. That's not the only word, but that's one of them.
Chair?
Yes, please.
Okay, so to board member Miller's question specific to the term stabilization, stabilization is a term used to apply for periods of either economic uncertainty or economic decline or anything. You stabilize a particular fund in order to absorb the shock of a particular either unforecasted or forecasted circumstance, such as a recession, by funding a particular account that's designated as an economic stabilization account. You're inferring that adding that term economic to the word stabilization, that you're creating a fund that would be available should economic circumstances present themselves in such a manner where it could be detrimental to the current level of funding. That was one of the, so just as a quick example, looking back to the 2008 to the Great Recession, and there's some agreement, disagreement on this too. It took roughly 5 years to quote unquote come out of that time period. So an economic stabilization account or amount of money that's quote unquote set aside would help you absorb that and possibly make it so you wouldn't have to incur such a decline in funding, or to help you, weather the storm, so to speak, and come out of it faster than 5 years. Does that help answer her question related specifically to the term stabilization, sir?
Not quite.
Member Lair?
No, not
Follow
quite.
up?
And
Okay.
the chair, you almost got there, Scott, but
Okay.
here's, I want you to me, there's still no stabilization as to what? Stabilization based on, if I were to buy into stabilization or some of the language that's circulating, I
Mhm.
would expect a constitutional amendment, even though it may sound a little unsophisticated. I would
Mhm.
expect it to say stabilization as of the 2009 fiscal
Okay.
year.
Yeah, I think I see.
So, Member Lear, is the question whether stabilization would impose a floor in the Constitution on particular funding
It
levels?
would not so much, although it might have that effect too. The question I have is that stabilization has to be related to something. It's not stabilized as of 1898. It's stabilized as
Yeah.
to some event or time or percentage or number. And I don't see that, which makes me feel like it means nothing.
Yeah.
Deputy
I would
Jones?
offer just real quickly stabilization to the prior year funding level, right? Or to the
Okay.
prior year funding. You could say that, or funding
Yes.
level as of
Yeah.
2000. You could say that. Yes.
Okay.
So stable.
That-
Yeah. No, I think we're.
That would
Yeah, I
give
think I see what
me-
you're saying.
That would give me some comfort, some that like it really had some meaning.
Right.
Thank you. That's a helpful
Okay.
clarification.
Members, we have Member Straight and Member Booth.
Yes, thank you. So as I look at that first bullet point, funding a 6% WPU increase for fiscal year 24. So that would be next year, right?
Yeah. Next fiscal. Oh, sorry.
Okay. And we absolutely don't know for certain what the inflationary adjustment would be. Or is this in addition? Is this 6% WPU in addition to the inflation?
No.
Well, it could be that we're between 4 and 5% next year. That could be a possibility. So
Chair, let me just.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, sir. Finish. Yep.
no,
Oh, okay. So right now, as it stands, we know what the inflationary adjustment percentage is for fiscal year 24. That's 3.4%.
okay.
And then, by way of where we're at, as of this date time group in the legislative process, PEA has recommended to EAC an additional 2.6% increase to the value of the WPU to get to the 6%. So it's 6% in total, with the 3.4% having been derived at the 5-year rolling average too. So as we progress towards fiscal year 25, and if they keep the inflationary index, then, you know, we would add next year into the 5-year roll, or I'm sorry, the next year of data for the inflationary CPI into that to get to the 5-year rolling average. So we do know right now what they have provided by way of the motion and calculation is 3.4% is the inflationary index or adjustment for fiscal year 24. So
That's very convenient to make it that. I mean, so no matter what, if it were 6% inflationary adjustment, then we get 6%. And if it's 1%, we get 6%, and it's a difference of 5. You know, to me, that sort of undermines the reason for having the inflationary adjustment, because that's why we need to attach a goal to it, which we did in the one that we put forth, which was get to that 75th percentile. That's a measurable goal. It's a way to get to a spot. This, well, that just, because maybe it hits 8%. Does that mean we go to -2? I mean, anyway, we've really got to start making some difference in real dollars.
Thank you, Member Straight, Member Booth, and then Member Bogus.
Thank you, Chair Moss. I'm particularly grateful for the conversations that have been going on. Happy that many of our board leadership and of our board members have been able to have conversations with legislators, and I'm so deeply concerned how much words matter, and the words that we do eventually choose to send forward have got to be very carefully chosen. I was appreciative of Board Member Norton and Board Member Wood's proposals, and as we consider those today, I think it will behoove us to think very carefully. I spent a fairly lengthy amount of time on the phone with superintendent from my area, and they are deeply concerned at the grassroots level. Without the earmark, without the constitutional guarantee, along can come bills like House Bill 372, and all of a sudden now a public referendum might be possible, requiring school districts to jump through all kinds of hoops. And he said, we'll just be brought to our knees year after year trying to make the budgets work without any guarantees. And so I would just encourage all of us, as we discussed today, to go for the boldest possible language, because we're not talking about some referendum that has to do with infrastructure, potholes on the freeway. We're talking about our children and our future life in the great state of Utah. So thanks to all those that are working so hard. I look forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Member Booth. We don't yet have a motion on the floor, so it's kind of an informational opportunity to talk to Deputy Jones, but we do have 2 lights on, and then try to move into motions that we can formally discuss. I apologize. I see on my screen here, it was Vice Chair Earl and then Member Bogus. Member Bogus then.
Thank you, Chair. So Superintendent Jones, when I read the language freeze, I do believe I know what that means, and I have to apologize. I have Utah code in 3 bound binders at home, but it's not here, and I have this code marked, but I do believe it might be 53F-2-302, are they talking about expanding that code into those fiscal years? Is that what the freeze means?
So I'm, Chair, if I may, I'm not sure if they mean to expand the code. They just mean to basically, so since, you know, birth rates, all the statistics that we've got are demonstrating that we're either going to be flat or just increase just slightly over the next 5 years. They base it a lot on the Gardner Institute research study that came out, and I can send that to the board. That basically, you know, you just freeze the enrollment rates over the next 5 years. And Chair Moss, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Senator Milner said then in 30, we could come back and review that. What review means exactly, I don't know. Would review mean, review the constitutional amendment language to see if we need to change it again? I'm still not sure I'm clear on that, so.
I think this was a statutory proposal,
Right.
right? That, so not.
Or I'm sorry, the statutory, yeah.
My understanding was that this would freeze and reinvest any drop in WP numbers into WP value, thereby holding steady, harmless for 5 years, subject to revisiting. And there was discussion about whether that should be extended or.
So basically what they're doing is trying to make sure that if we do see steeper declines in enrollment, you don't lose those, that they repurpose that money, so to speak, or do that. So to me, it's a way of since we don't precisely know how much enrollment we could lose over the next 5 years, that it's, basically freezing the enrollment numbers at that. If we see increases in that too, they would review that at the end of the 5 years, if that makes sense.
I think
Member
so.
Bogus, did that answer the
Well,
question?
I have a small follow-up with that, kid, please. So you're talking about, and maybe I'm speaking a different language than you, and that's okay. But you're talking about umbrella funding. You're not talking about funding direct to districts, right?
No, I'm talking, so the enrollment statistics or the data that we use for enrollment is really specifically for the funding for district, or for LEAs, right?
So-
That's how we determine how much, we use their October 1 enrollment numbers to calculate that. So they would be freezing
Mhm.
that number at a certain level, so that if we do see even more like losses of 100 or 1,000 students or things like that, it does, that's what I took from the meeting, was that the reason for that, so.
Okay, so let's just say, just as an example, you have a district, they've got, I don't know, I'll make up a number, 40,000 kids, and they lose
Oh.
10,000, they're gonna be funded at 40,000 for the next 5 years?
Well, there are some, we have a hold harmless process that we do on a one each basis for the districts.
Uh-huh.
But now I think I understand further through the chair, your question about umbrella funding, right?
Uh-huh.
Is that overall enrollment numbers and then the processes that we take, we would just do it each year and see, how that affects each different district. But if they freeze it at that time, then technically in an umbrella fashion, it looks to be that they would hold everybody harmless to that extent, because you're freezing the enrollment numbers for
So,
5 years.
Let's
I mean, we
say,
need to develop that more for sure, so.
my apologies.
Go ahead.
So let's say we do have a system that, 215, their website says they're gonna start to siphon money out of public ed, but if we have a freeze and a hold harmless, we're adding to the taxpayer out responsibility, not taking away from it. That's how I would look at that.
Well, Chair, if I may, so I'm not sure what they mean by siphoning money, other than, like, for instance, how they're funding this first iteration, if you will, of HB 215 is not from the minimum school program. It's, well, the teacher salary portion is, the ESA portion is, but the funding they're taking is not from the minimum school program. So if they're, we'd have to just make sure that we were clear on if they're increasing the funding for school choice, so to speak, where that source of the funding is coming from, right? And then if they freeze the enrollment piece of it, and that's not the only piece of the equation or the formula that we use, right? Because there's membership, things like that. Then what I took away from the meeting is that they're really trying to put some level of control in, if you will, to that if we do see significant declines in enrollment over the next 5 years, we don't lose a bunch of money that way, that they would, do the savings from it and keep it in the MSP, in the minimum school program. So,
Through the WPU, and I'll just say, my understanding is that question was raised if there's declining enrollment due to 215, the public schools would be held harmless.
right.
And that could result
Well-
in a duplicate payment because you would be keeping harmless from kids that you might lose, whether through migration, birth rate, or 215. And one comment that was brought out was that might affect decisions about whether to expand 215, because an expansion would result, at least for that period, in duplicate payment. That was
Yeah.
a comment that came out, and it was clarified that, yes, that's what the commitment would be, is to hold public schools harmless for any of those enrollment declines. Is that consistent with what you heard?
Yeah, I think though it's important for me to distinguish or make sure I'm clear that so we have the statewide perspective of funding, right? Then you have your one eaches by LEA. I mean, I don't want to be on the record of saying that an LEA would not see a decline in funding because their enrollment may decline, right? But it's from a statewide perspective, I think what they're trying to do is control for, a certain level of funding to continue. But as children move, as students move in and out, the money should follow the student, right? So on a one each basis, I think we would continue to see LEA, see a decline in enrollment, but then if LEA-B is the gainer of those, then they would go up. We do that through the process that we have too, but they would keep, some semblance of control or order in that, from the state aggregate viewpoint. And then, but I'm a little concerned that I don't want to mislead anybody and say that we won't see a one each, type decline in funding. But I think the intent here is from a statewide aggregate point is to have some semblance of control so we don't see a significant or precipitous decline in overall state funding.
And the mechanism for that, I think, as was up on the board, would be to reinvest decline in numbers into
Right.
value, and that would cushion the blow. It wouldn't necessarily mean that every district would be held exactly the same, but
Yeah.
that reinvestment in the value of the WPU would cushion the blow from the decline, and whether it cushions it entirely would be subject to perhaps inter-school transfers.
Right, because we
as
certainly
I
never
understand.
want to get into a situation where we devalue
Right.
the WPU.
Member Norton, Chair Norton? Oh, wait, did I skip anybody? No. We're good? Okay. Sorry, Member Norton.
Chair, I'm not sure if this is the right time. I do have a motion I want to bring forward. I don't know if we're going to discuss this one and take it to a vote, or if we're waiting, if I can make a different motion, or how do you want to proceed?
Floor is open for motion. So this was a suggested proposal from the legislature. If a member wants to move that for approval and recommendation, they're welcome to do that. We've got yours, others, anything else that comes to the floor. So yes, this is appropriate time to bring a motion.
Okay, I would like to make a motion. And, come on, mouse, let's go there. Okay, I move that the legislature shall establish a statutory framework that includes public education funding stabilization, enrollment growth, and an inflationary index from overall state revenues to protect public education funding levels and prioritize public education funding increases during periods of economic increase. And I'd like to speak to the motion.
Is there a second? I'll second. Go ahead and
Thank you.
speak to the motion if you'd like.
This has my name on it, but it was a group effort. Let me start off by saying that in reading through the legislature's proposal to us and in speaking with legislators, I got some information, and I think others that were there did as well, about some of the terms that have been used in this, that the legislature does feel that it is appropriate for us to include terms such as the funding, education funding stabilization, this enrollment growth, the inflationary index, and that is something they would foresee going forward. Once this was put together, this morning, had an opportunity to let some legislators read it. They too said they felt that this was in keeping with where they could see the motion going. I do not have any hopes or dreams that this is something that they would take, but I do think it's something that they could use. I also think that any motion that, well, this is personal opinion, that any motion that goes forward should be subject to adding insights and input from our educational partners as they bring forth additional information.
Thank you, Chair Norton. Any discussion to that motion? Vice Chair Earl?
Yeah, just a-
Member Wood and then member,
Okay.
did I get it right? Earl, Wood and Bogus, yes.
Yeah, just a couple of things. We talked about stabilization and attaching numbers or something to that earlier, and I would speak against that. I think when you attach a number or a year or something, you've committed yourself to something that you are unsure about. So I'm just speaking to that. I think the funding stabilization is a responsible way to go. And then I'm just wondering about, maybe someone could speak to the last phrase, the economic increase. I'm just wondering.
Question for Deputy Jones.
Yeah, maybe what, I'm just thinking, yeah, during periods of.
Boy, I really wish I would have got my economics degree so long ago, but I did.
We just passed financial literacy, so maybe there's
Right, yeah.
something there.
Right. So what I think the intent there is behind economic increase, I really think the term is economic growth, right? I mean, I'm not familiar with the term economic increases. I think what we're talking about is economic growth during periods of economic growth. That's while there's certainly, I think we're saying the same thing. I think we're saying during times of economic growth or prosperity, those are terms that I was taught, in my macro courses and microeconomic courses years ago, is that the terms are economic growth, economic prosperity. Increases is certainly an indication of that, you're seeing, rises in personal income, GDP grows, things like that. So I think that's really what I think we're saying the same thing, but I would likely use a term more along the lines of economic growth.
Okay, I'd like to make an amendment. Do you think we need to change both of those increases or funding increases? Prioritize public education funding. Well, I think it would need to be increases there, right? Growth at the
Yeah,
end. So
yeah, I
just
think
changing
that's-
increases at the last to growth. That's my
Right.
amendment.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Member Wood.
Okay.
It's a friendly, so
No such thing. I've learned.
economic
I've learned,
growth.
sir.
Okay. Wait. Just barely had the jersey. All right, Member Wood,
Yes, I'd like to make an amendment to this motion.
okay?
So after the words framework, statutory framework, oh, sorry.
The
Well,
amendment's
they said
been
it was
accepted.
friendly, so and he didn't take it to a vote.
I
would
think-
have been
yeah, I
way
think the
more
amendment
comfortable
has
if he
been
would have taken
accepted.
it To a vote.
I think the amendment's been accepted, incorporated, so we're free to add
Okay,
an amendment to the
that's what I
underlying
thought.
motion. Yep. You got
I
it.
was waiting for words without objection, but you didn't say them, so.
you got
it.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, you got it.
after the word framework, I would like to add the words for funding the minimum school program and general system support.
Is there a second to that proposed amendment? Then seconded, would you like to speak to the motion? The amendment.
So as we look to protecting our education funding, there are many parts of this funding that we sit through maybe 2 days of public ed appropriations where people come in and request money from the public education system time after time after time that are not intimately connected to the work that happens in our schools with our teachers, with our kids. Sometimes it's nonprofits wanting additional funding. And so I would love to see that we are actually working to support the minimum school program and that general system support, this building, the staff, the people who work with it, that are focused on the needs of our teachers, our students within our schools. And mostly I want the discussion. So live or die this amendment. I'd love to hear what others think of this.
All right, thank you, Member Wood. Any discussion to the proposed amendment? We have, I think, let's see, Member Hart and Member Earl. Oh, did we not get you on this round? Member Bogus?
I just had a point of clarification.
Okay.
Though I believe it's Article 10, I just wanted to clarify that this is intended for Article 10 because it's not in the motion as it's currently presented.
So
I
Chair
just-
Norton, is that correct? Yes.
Okay, thank
Seeing a
you.
nodding of head. So yes, this would be Article 10. Member Hart. Member Norton, I still see your light. Were you in line or was that left? Okay, so Member Hart and then Member Earl.
Can we have Deputy Jones, can you speak to this minimum school program? Because I'm a little concerned. Now, admittedly, I'm trying really hard to keep up with all this. But minimum school program, we have more than just the minimum school program. And I'm worried about calling out the minimum school program. What about all those? I understand it's a naive question. Can you just speak to the minimum school program and what it would mean to put it in there?
Not at all, ma'am. So Chair, to Vice Chair Hart's question, minimum school program funding is the bulk of or the largest piece of the overall public education system funding. I mean, there's no, it's kind of, then you have above the line, below the line. I think what Board Member Wood is saying with general system support is there's money that, for example, comes into this office and stays here, right? It's outside, so to speak, of the minimum school program. That's quite a bit of money. So if you use language that, you know, is specific to the minimum school program, I guess the risk would be interpreted that that's really the base funding, so to speak, that you want to protect. This is why earlier in the process, we proposed using something lines, goes back to the stabilization question, is what are you trying to preserve, right? Are you trying to preserve the minimum or stabilize the minimum amount of minimum school program funding from the prior year or the base budget overall? Because when we get the base budget bill at the beginning of the year, it is not only for the minimum school program, it also is the base budget from the prior year. You know, you got to start from the beginning, right? So you establish the base budget. And so it goes beyond, and again, I will say clearly that we recognize the minimum school program is the 80+% of the overall public education funding, but you still have funding that is outside of the minimum school program. And that typically can be termed along the lines of general system support. We support from this level, from our office, with the state money that comes into here, the LEAs, right? So if you use language that tries to capture that, I think you're okay. But what we're talking about here is with the minimum school program, that's your growth aspect, right? So each year, as you grow and you do that, that's good too. So that's, you know, we want to make sure on that too. I would just be a little cautious not to unnecessarily put yourselves into a, well, it's only this, right? It should be the whole of the public education funding with clarity on, is it the prior year base budget? Is it holistically or just the
Chair, I have a
I hope that
follow-up.
helps. I rambled,
So
sorry.
to the maker of the motion, are you including everything? What, can I, help me understand why, with the importance of including this? I'm just trying to.
Well, partially probably it's a bias because I come from a nonprofit background. And so when you see nonprofit organizations stand up their day, for hour after hour asking for 200,000 here or 1 million here, or for their nonprofit, whatever program they want, coming from the education budget, I'd like to see that money spent on our youth in our schools. So that's why I said it's an amendment. That's why I chose to bring it this way, because if the amendment dies, I'm not spending our time on a whole nother motion. We protect the clarity of board member Norton's.
I thank you. Member Earl and then Member Davis.
I guess I'm just thinking about putting a title of something in legislation that could be altered in, do you know what I mean? Through the legislative process, or in the Constitution that could be altered through the legislative process. I just think we have to be careful that we're not saying this is what we're going to protect, but then down the road, if there's, things get moved around or something, then we're saying, well, it's not under there anymore. So therefore this and that doesn't get protected. I like it broader personally. And although general system support sings to me more so than a very specific terminology where it could be actually a hindrance or do you know what I'm saying? So that the language may hinder the full extent of what needs to be protected and preserved. So,
And Chair, may I speak to that?
Sure.
Just looking at, I went into Kobe and looked up what the minimum school program is, and there's a list from A to Z. It's the adult education program. It's our WPU. It's the educator salary supplement. So that was why it was like this is an A through Z program, but I didn't want to leave out that general part. So thank you.
Got it.
yeah.
Chair,
Follow-up?
Rebuttal.
Chair, can I make
Deputy
just
Jones,
clarification?
please.
So I just want to make sure that I might have misspoke when I said this. MSP is the basis for the economic stabilization account as it happens right now, right? So, I just want to make sure that I didn't mix that in with the general system support too, but MSP is that too. So thank you.
Thank you. Did you have a question?
Yeah, not a
Follow-up?
question, but maybe just a follow-up. I think that's my point though, is that those are currently wrapped in there. Those could be taken out if the terminology did not fit legislatively. Does that make sense? It could be moved around, but anyways.
So, well,
Legislatively, it could be changed down the road is the only thing. And then we're protecting that title and not necessarily the system.
Member Davis.
Cannot unmute. I'm in queue for another amendment.
Okay, let's come back to this one then. And maybe I could just ask one further clarifying question. Outside the MSP, there are items that would fall under the general system that are not necessarily, I think, what's been described as kind of a request for appropriation that we see coming into PEA, but are regular parts of the system, right? And so there are those items outside the A to Z MSP. If we were to say general system, would that necessarily exclude those one-time RFAs, or would it have any effect on sort of those items that are within the realm of what we would consider general support and those that come in periodically? Would that language make any distinction between those two categories outside the MSP?
So Chair, if you're asking Scott that question, I would defer to an attorney on that. Language is not my forte,
Okay.
right? I can add 1 and 1, but I really can't speak very well or type very well, as many people say. But, I think that, that might be something that Mr. Quessenberry could address, or even, Deputy Stallings could do, because, again, so in I believe, at least I know it's at least in statute, you have general supervision and control over public education, right? So I think that general term is for the system support that you provide to meet your statutory obligation to provide general supervision and control, right? Because that the minimum school program money is flow through money, right? It goes right to the LEAs, but then you have an obligation, at least a statutory obligation, to provide general supervision and control of the system, right? So I think that's where that terminology comes from, that would imply that you have to have funding separate from, well, I don't know if you have to have it, but that it could be funding separate from pass-through or flow-through money to the LEAs. But then, you know, from a language perspective, I'm not your expert on that. So
Okay.
I would ask, you know, for help from my friends.
Assistant Attorney General Quisenberry, did you want to weigh in on that, or if not, we have a light from Member Lear?
Restate the question, please.
Just whether that language that says general system support, would that make any distinction between items that are normally within the year-to-year funding of the education system, but outside the MSP, versus those items that come in perhaps as an RFA during appropriations and are not usually line items that are sort of perennial line items? Does that make sense?
A little bit. So in other words, general system, whether it's broad enough to include, whether it's broad enough to incorporate.
Broad enough or narrow enough? I think the idea is to make some kind of distinction there. I'm just curious what the effect of that language would be. And if we don't know, that's okay. We're both, okay. No. Thank you for the clarification. That helps.
Scott spoke well for
Yeah.
being a non-lawyer.
Okay, gotcha. Member Lear.
I'm not positive this is the right time, but I have a substitute motion, and then I'd like to
Well,
speak to it.
is it substitute to the particular amendment?
No,
Because
it's a
we have-
substitute to the foundation motion.
Okay, I think we need to rule on the amendment first. And then
Chair?
this would bring us back. Deputy Stallings?
Sorry, I know I'm way back here. I was just going to add that in Article 10, Section 2, it does define what shall constitute the public school system. So you could refer to that. This is what it says. The public education system shall include all public elementary and secondary schools and such other schools and programs as the legislature may designate. So you could say something like, for funding the minimum school program and public education system defined in Section 2. I don't know if you want to do that, but it would kind of point to their own language that says the state board, the public education system. It's a pretty broad term though.
Okay, Member Straight, and that's an opportunity but Member Straight.
I have a question that actually goes right along with that. When COVID hit, what was the standard that was used at that point to determine what stayed and what went? Or was there a standard that there was? They came to a decision somehow.
I'm not sure who would be able to answer that question, if anybody. I see Superintendent Dixon stepping to the plate.
May I ask a clarifying question, sir?
Please.
When you say what came and what went, are you talking about the funding that came through the legislature in the 2020 session and then things were pulled back? Is that what you're referencing?
Yeah, it seemed like that there were lots of, we talk about it now, that there were things passed by the legislature that they said, oh, we're not sure where we're headed with all this. So they basically, but we kept certain things. Certain things were maintained. How did we come to that realization of what, because that's to me the minimum school program, which I know is also definitional, and what has been brought up here is definitional. Did we use any of that to determine?
So if I
Superintendent
may,
Dixon? Yeah.
that's a really great observation, Board Member Straight. At the end of the day, the things that were pulled back were actually some items that were on the board's list of requests, but not necessarily in the top 10. So for example, leadership initiative, I can think of a few things like that were pulled back, and then others were reduced to try and stay within a projection of revenue that they thought that they had. Now, the following year, of course, we saw that there was additional money, but not everything got funded or pulled back in. So it was, you could say what they saw as non-essentials at the time that were not on priority funding list, just as a safeguard. But I think your observation was very astute about, did they prioritize it just through the MSP?
Okay, if there are no further comments, oh, sorry. Vice Chair.
I don't remember all that was cut, but I remember programs were cut, but funding wasn't cut. We actually ended up with an increase out of that. Although we brought to the table 10%, 5%, 2%. In the end, we had an increase. Some of the things that were cut would have been like the administrative for small districts. I can't remember exactly how that panned out, but that was cut. And then immediately we had to go I think it was in August or whenever they had to go back and put money in there because it really impacted smaller districts. So it's interesting to think about that when it really, we didn't cut funding, but programs were maybe cut. So I don't know. Yeah, yeah. So.
Okay, any further discussion to the amendment to the motion? If not, the amendment before the body is add to, well, I guess I gotta read the whole thing, but the board, now we'll just read the red. There we go. To add to Member Norton's motion, the words in red after framework for funding the minimum school program and general system support. We are ready to vote. Vice Chair Hart.
Sorry.
Sorry. We just don't want to leave you out. Let's try a show of hands. All in favor, please raise your hands. We do. We have hybrid. Okay. So Member Bogus, Member Booth,
Yes.
Member Klein.
Yes.
Member Davis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Earl.
No.
Member Green,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hart,
Yes.
Member Hymus. Member Carey,
No.
Member Lear.
Can I pass for a moment?
Is that an
I don't
abstention?
want to abstain forever.
We
just
can't,
to come
we
back to
can't
me at the end.
pass. I don't know if there's, is there a provision to pass? I don't think we have that.
Punt, there's punt.
Punt. Okay, we'll circle back. Member Norton,
No.
Member Reel,
Yes.
Member Straight.
Don't think I got an answer from the chair.
We'll come back to you.
Okay.
I was told we could come back, so
Oh, thank you.
Member Straight,
Yes.
Member Wood. And Member Moss is a yes. So, and back to Member Earl. Lear.
I'm a yes.
All right, so that motion passes 11-4.
Chair,
So that's the amendment to Deputy Jones has it. I'm sorry, do we have? I had,
Amendment. Cindy has it.
I've got a
well,
motion. Oops.
hold on, let's turn to Deputy Jones for a point of clarification. We'll come back to the.
right, and I don't know if this is still relevant, but you know, in addition to what the superintendent said, this is spot on. So if you recall, COVID really hit after the legislative session was over. Do you remember that? And then, you know, March
Yeah.
timeframe, okay.
Barely.
So what they did, what they had those special sessions, what they did is they kept the base budget and then took back the new money, right? So why I think that's important and why that's a good, you know, all your questions are always great questions, but why that's a great question is, again, you know, just, you know, and all the other things you're thinking about, what are you trying to protect, right? And that's what they did is they protected the base budget back during the COVID years, but then just, you know, took away the new money or back in that time frame, right? They just went back and said, okay, we're going to keep the base budget, but we're going to take back all the new money that came out of the appropriation process, right, from that legislative session. Then they went into the what do you call them, special sessions, right, and did that way. But you know, same thing. So I think that's an important piece to know. I think that's why Board Member Straight was asking that question too. Is just, you know, how does it
Okay.
normally work?
Thank you. Member Davis, I realized you had been in line for an amendment and we skipped you. So back to Member Davis. Are we deferred?
Yeah,
is what we did.
thank you. I have an amendment to establish a statutory framework that includes, these are the words to replace. Again, establish a statutory framework that includes, I would strike those words. And I would replace those with assure funding for public education by. Now, I made that amendment before we just passed the last one, so I'd have to tweak it a bit with the new wording that got put in, but it would say the legislature shall assure funding for public education minimum school program and general system support by funding, and then the rest. I'd like to speak to the motion.
Let's see if we have a second once we get the language up there. That look
Does that
right, Member
got it?
Davis?
Um,
Want me to read it?
Can she see it?
I can see it, yeah.
Okay.
I'm just reading it. Yeah.
All right, that's the motion. Is there a second?
I would second and ask for a point of clarification.
Okay, it's been seconded. Point of clarification before we go back to the maker.
Member Davis, do you mean usher or ensure?
We had that discussion twice today.
Member Davis?
Well, let's have someone who knows the vocabulary better, but it seems like assure is the right vocabulary word in that spot, but I certainly would be open if someone tells me otherwise.
Anybody wanting to weigh in on assure versus insure?
I actually looked it up
Deputy-
this morning.
Well, let's go to Member Wood, and our Assistant AG might also want to weigh in. Member Wood?
So assure is to confidently dispel any doubts. Insure is to cover with an insurance policy, and ensure is to make sure it happens. So do we want to dispel any doubts that the legislature will fund it, or do we want to make sure that the legislature funds it?
We want to exercise in
Then it's
futility.
ensure.
Member
over
Davis
assure.
as the maker?
Then we want ensure.
Insure without objection? All right. Okay, so ensure. All right, and Member Bogus, you were the second on that? That meets your second? Okay. All right, back to Member Davis, discussion of the proposed amendment.
Yeah, thank you. I just would ask us if we are saying that we would like the legislature to establish a statutory framework that includes these things. They've already done that in 357. And if they hadn't, or if there's a little piece missing, they can do it. It doesn't give us anything, really. It doesn't give us any constitutional language, which from the folks that I've talked to in the field, they haven't agreed upon any substitute language, but the one thing they do agree on is that they want language in the Constitution rather than a statutory framework. So I'm just trying to pull, pieces together. We can hear you, whoever's whispering in your microphone. Just a heads up. We online people can hear you. So really, I would like to preserve something in the Constitution for public education. We wouldn't preserve an earmark with the entire income tax. This would still give flexibility to the income tax for removing the food tax and for dealing with the financial cliff that's coming up in a few years. But it would also still give something to public ed, which would be the inflationary index and the stabilization and the enrollment growth. Then the exchange or the trade would be for losing, the tie to the income tax and the potential that brings. The trade would be having this put in the Constitution, but getting some really good promises, hopefully statutorily, for funding increases and a reduction of ed bills or what the things that we've already suggested in our other motion. So I would move to strengthen the current motion by making this amendment.
So, sir, this just may be me, but I just want to make sure, again, I just want to talk about the stabilization framework, right? So the stabilization is MSP driven, right? I don't think that they would be, based on the language we've seen so far or received from the legislature, I don't think they would be open to including the board's budget or the line items in the stabilization framework. Your stabilization framework would be for the minimum school program slash, you know, above the line, basic line programs, right? All I was trying to say was that, you know, with just saying MSP or things that, you know, there's the whole of the public education budget, right? But then there's the minimum school program piece, of which it's a large part. And then there's the stabilization definition or piece to that, which is centric to or completely linked, based on my understanding from the meetings we've had, to the minimum school program, to the thing, not bringing in, you know, these line items outside of the minimum school program into stabilization. So I'm not sure that, you know, so I thought I'd try a different approach on just trying to make that distinguishing piece here, based on what I've been told up to this point. So I hope that helps and doesn't confuse it more. Over.
Thank you, Deputy Jones.
Uh,
Any further
point of
discussion to the?
order.
Yes.
I don't know if
Member
this is a point of order, but can we get clarification? Was that about my amendment, what we just heard, or is that about the previous amendment? And is Deputy Superintendent Jones suggesting removing the minimum school program and general system support language? What is?
So
Deputy Jones, is this to Member Davis's
yeah, I'm
amendment?
going to start talking in the third person here. Scott is not suggesting anything, right? That you do anything with your motions. I just really want to make sure that we don't have to come back with, you know, well, I didn't understand that, you know, we were trying to protect all of the public education funding by, you know, being inclusive of a stable, you know, setting up a stabilization framework. The stabilization framework is for, you know, the funding that goes to the LEAs, right? Because it's the stabilization account is driven by the minimum school program aspects or factors, right? So it's not really that I'm talking to her motion, to Board Member Davis's motion, but all in all, it just seems to me that we're still not, you know, and I wanted to make sure that we represent all of the meetings that have taken place, and to make sure that everybody's clear that as it relates to the stabilization framework, that would be minimum school program. That it's highly unlikely the legislature would want to include or, you know, commit to including programs or funding outside of the minimum school program in a stabilization framework. So
All right, so my understanding then, the board has voted on the minimum school program language.
right.
That's been adopted, but you're saying that the term framework itself has some reference to that stabilization framework, and so you're speaking to
Correct.
Member Davis's striking of that language because it would affect in the way you've described. Is that, am I getting the
Yeah,
link there? Because we've already passed the other one, but
Right.
you're addressing this one in the connection to the prior
Correct.
language. Okay,
Yeah, not just to her motion,
got it.
in the general sense of what my understanding of the legislators that we've met with so far intent is with stabilization framework.
Okay, and I'm just trying to make sure the comments are germane to the present amendment, but I think
Yes, sir.
you've explained how
Hopefully,
framework relates to that.
Roger,
Okay.
sir. Thank
May I
you.
follow up,
Got
Chair?
it. Further, yes, Member Davis.
Okay, so we need to get really clear on this and Chair, if I can address Deputy Superintendent Jones.
Sure.
The intent of this motion is to put something, an action in the Constitution for the legislature to fund. So I need to understand what you are saying about the word framework, because the intent, I think, of the other motion or the original motion is that the legislature shall establish the things they're going to do in code, rather than have it sort of memorialized in the Constitution. At least these pieces. So.
A question for Deputy Jones? Or,
Yeah, so maybe this will help a little more. Can you go to what the legislative proposed language is? Because they reference that the state, don't they represent the stabilization piece or framework in theirs?
can we scroll up to Article 10?
Scroll up, you gotta, yeah.
Article 10 language.
Yeah, so read that again. I can't see that far.
So proposed Article 10 language was subject to revenue growth. The legislature shall establish and maintain a statutory public education budgetary stabilization and funding framework.
Right. So then in this, yeah, so my response to Board Member Davis is yes, their intent is to put statutory language for the framework being, stabilization framework would, but it would be for the minimum school program, right? Nothing outside of the minimum school program. That's my understanding, but I could be wrong. Anyone can, there's some meetings I haven't been in, so if I'm missing that definition, but I'm, 99.9% sure that they don't want something outside of the minimum school program to be part of a stabilization framework.
So are you saying we're trying to put something outside of the minimum school program? Are you referring to the language, the general support language? Because that ties back to our office. Are you saying we should take that out?
No, I'm not saying that at all. All I'm trying to say is that the framework, the stabilization framework would be for minimum school program centric. And then anything outside of that you could capture in a bill or whatever.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Yes. Yeah, from
I-
a statutory perspective.
I
Right.
think that's understood.
Okay.
Do you
All right. I
think
just want to make
this
sure.
motion, do you think this motion is unclear about that?
No, I don't. I just want to make sure everybody though is clear about that distinguishing factor. So
Our distinguishing.
that's your,
Our distinguishing.
that's your
factor. It may not
distinguishing,
be
yes.
And
the
last
May not be
follow-up.
theirs, but that, yes.
Last
Go ahead,
follow-up, Chair.
Member Davis.
For Deputy Superintendent Jones again, do you feel that the language in the proposed motion is the message with the intent that we would like these things ensured in the Constitution? Is that your understanding? Does this language do that? And then any other things they want to do statutorily with increases and such, obviously we would give those up. We would give up the right to the income tax for their flexibility in exchange for some statutory promises and the funding of these things that are listed.
Yes, yeah, I do. But again, I'm not well versed in constitutional language. So you really need to ask that question of an attorney, not me. Because from a financial perspective, I think I understand what you're trying to do, but I'm not sure that the language satisfies that. You need legal advice on that, not
May we ask our
financial
attorneys?
advice.
We can, and we're giving him a little bit of an on-the-spot challenge, so I'm not sure he's had time to, but
Digest
AJ
it.
Quisenberry?
Would you restate that again, Member Davis?
Yeah, does the motion language meet the intent that the legislature do these things for public education? Funding for enrollment growth, funding for stabilization, and funding for an inflationary index. Does it do those things? Then on top of that, they can do, we'll have to, take the hit from being linked to the income tax, and they'll have to see if they will couple that with our statutory suggestions. But does this language meet the intent that the Constitution will require the legislature to do these minimum pieces that are currently already in 357 in the statute? Does this language do that?
I hate to dodge like this, but I need to look at a little more carefully the state constitution and kind of dig into it a little bit deeper. Maybe look at some cases that have interpreted the language. So it's a little bit of a challenge to kind of opine on that.
Does it get us closer to that than the original language, which says the legislature shall establish a statutory framework?
Yeah, I would say it gets you closer.
Okay, then I'll keep my motion on the table. Thank you.
Any additional discussion to the proposed amendment? Member Earl, and let's see,
I'm still in the
Member-
queue for a motion.
you're still in queue, and Member Klein also. Okay. Kelsey, are you in line too after Member Earl? Okay, I got your light on somehow. Member Earl and Member Klein.
Okay, and I guess maybe I hope this isn't duplicative of what Board Member Davis is trying to get to, but I guess I see establishing a statutory framework as a different thing than the education funding stabilization, but maybe that's not the case. I'm trying to figure that out, if that is the case or not. I just think a statutory framework would be necessary in order for the rest of it to take place. And maybe it's duplicative, I'm not sure, but I'm trying to decide if those are two different things or the same thing.
Member Davis or Superintendent Dixon?
Yeah, to be even more specific, Deputy Jones, you were using the term stabilization framework, and the motion is statutory framework. So Vice Chair Earl and I were wondering, those seem like two different things, but are you using those interchangeably when you were talking about the stabilization framework?
So,
Because they're both embedded in there,
right.
so we're trying to
So
get.
Chair, right. So statutory framework is the language. I just want to make sure that it's understood that the stabilization account itself is is determined or funded through the MSP, right? So if you use a constitutional language, it goes back to what Vice Chair Earl was saying. If you start to use particular program language in the Constitution, you can get that or statute too. If you start going into programs rather than considering the whole of the public education budget, there's risk there. That's all I'm going to say. So I'm not trying to say stabilization framework, but as part of the statutory framework, you have to make sure you're distinguishing between stabilization, growth, and anything in that sense, right? Because growth is part of the MSP as well, and doing all too. So what are you trying to do? Are you trying to protect the whole of the public education budget, or are you trying to go like within the minimum school program? I would recommend that you avoid references to minimum, like programmatic, right? That you keep it as a whole of the public education budget. Otherwise, you risk, the legislature saying, well, we'll just change that. We'll change this on the fly. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thank you. Over.
Thank you. Member Klein.
Just a question. I want to make sure that I understand for sure that when we say public education funding, does that mean publicly funded education? So would that include scholarship money like from HB 215? And is HB 215 included in the minimum school program?
So HB 215, Chair, if I may, to Board Member
Yes,
Klein's
please.
question. HB 215 has 2 distinguishing factors, right? There's the funding that goes for the scholarships. That is outside of the MSP. But the funding for the educators is within the MSP. That's the educational salary adjustments, right? So then again, not being an attorney, when Scott, here's the words public education funding, I define that as the whole of the public education budget. Not distinguishing that it's only the MSP portion, or it's just I look at that as a whole. Does that help answer the question on what Scott thinks public education means?
Member Klein.
So public education funding does not include scholarships.
It does.
It does.
Yeah, it does, because that money is coming outside of the MSP. It's coming out of a line item that's in your.
Okay, so it's
initiative
everything.
programs. Yes.
What we're talking about
Yes, ma'am.
encompasses it all.
Right. So Chair, when you talk public education funding, and again, relying on attorneys and definition of words and things like that, public education funding to me means the whole of the budget, right? The whole of it. When you say minimum school program, it is a large part of overall public education funding, but is not the whole of public education funding. So.
Deputy Stallings.
Just to add to what Deputy Jones stated, the HB 215 or Utah Fits All Scholarship Program is in Title 53F, which is one of the titles that you oversee. And so it was helpful for me to hear this conversation, because originally I was saying, well, just point over to Article 10, Section 2, which states the public education system includes our elementary and secondary public schools, but it also says, and other programs as the legislature provides in statute. And I think you could have two arguments about the Utah Fits All Scholarship. It is in the public education sections of the code. So there it would say, yes, the State Board of Education does have general, control and supervision over that program as well. On the other hand, somebody could say, well, that's not a public education program. But I think to Board Member Klein, to your point, at this point, since the legislature did put that program in Title 53F, you have constitutional authority over that program. And it is now a public school program. It's just going towards homeschool and private school. But those dollars are establishing or supporting kind of this unique or separate public school program.
Okay, I have one follow-up question. If we say ensure funding, the legislature shall, would the legislature do that through statute? And would that be different than establishing a statutory framework? In other words, if they are told to ensure, and we heard the definition, would a statutory framework be one of the ways they would do that? Is that done some other way than through statute, including the bill of bills and those kinds of things? Remember, Deputy Stallings?
So actually, there's a lot of things that can happen outside of statute. Appropriations aren't necessarily statute. So the code or Utah code is statute, but actually appropriations are done through a bill that aren't necessarily codified. So I can see now, as we're talking through this some more, about how there's two different things. Establishing a statutory framework kind of establishes that expectation of statutorily what that would look like year over year. But then outside of that, you also have the actual appropriations that occur. And that's not codified in code. Those appropriations are done by bills and they're law, but they're not statutory.
Gotcha. Any other question or discussion of the member Bogus?
So I just want to acknowledge that I love the work that's been put into this. I really struggle messing with Article 10. I really struggle doing anything to it at all. And I just want to put that out there because even though this language is good, people have been very thoughtful, they've been pragmatic. I don't want to discount any of that, but the reality is, does it put us in a place where nothing is unconstitutional? And I'm just asking that question, is adding this language going to put us in a worse place than we're presently in? And it's just a question.
Rhetorical question or directed to anybody in particular? Because we're fine.
I guess
with
maybe I
rhetorical
would direct that
questions.
to Superintendent Jones.
Oh.
Maybe, I
that-
don't know.
I tried.
On advice of counsel, I plead the fifth. Yes, ma'am.
Is that something you'd be able to?
Yeah.
Is that an attorney question?
I really do believe it's more, I think we're bouncing between, the financial implications of what Scott says versus the legal implications of wording, of language, right? Or of not putting something in an article or doing that. That's got to be handled by attorneys. That really cannot be something that any financial or any individual in a financial position should really answer or advise you on.
And I'll just point out that what we're debating is the possible recommendation to the legislature,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
So
Yes.
this language will obviously be subject to scrutiny by attorneys and
Right.
finance folks. And so that's part of that discussion, but all this clarification is great. I guess I just
It
point
is.
out that it's not the end of the road necessarily.
Right.
It's part of what we will offer up and presumably would have that discussion about. I don't see any lights. Oh,
I do.
Cindy, sorry. Member Davis?
Yeah, I just want to make really clear that right now we are voting on the amendment, not the whole motion.
Right.
And
Correct.
the amendment is that instead of the Constitution directing legislators to make a framework in code that may or may not be changed in 5 years, This is saying they will fund stabilization, enrollment growth, and an inflationary index. And keeping the minimum school program there addresses some of the concerns that were expressed about 215, which means that that would not be included in this, only the teacher salary portion, not the other portion. But I would like to know if people have a friendly, if people would support this, instead of saying general system support, it should say public education system support. Is there any problem with that? Does anyone have a problem with that? And then my last,
Is that,
I'm asking you, Chair, if that's appropriate. And then my last question is, or thought is, I don't think all of this is ready for prime time personally. I think hopefully someone out there, maybe after we pass this amendment, before we look at the overall motion, I think we should consider postponing. So our attorneys, Brian has said he needs a little more time. So we have time to talk with our public education partners. And we see kind of what their thoughts are, as Representative Peterson suggested this morning in our meeting, not necessarily to postpone, but to collaborate and communicate with them. And we need time to do that. But for now, we're just voting on the amendment, and I would speak for this amendment.
all right, and let me just address what the legislature's asked us to do. We're meeting tomorrow at 7 again with the earmark group, and they asked us to find out the will of our board through a vote. And so that's not the end of the discussion, to Member Davis's point, but you know, this board can choose not to take a position on anything. We can choose whatever the body decides. If we do take a position, we can take out on one or more things or none, and that would go into the discussion with our education partners and report back to the earmark group tomorrow. So those are the opportunities. Member Hymas.
Thank you. I appreciate Member Davis's amendment here. This change to public education system, does the minimum school program fall within the public education system? Do we now need to mention, right, we're saying we want something inside the public education system and the public education system. So would it not just be
May
best
I
to say
answer,
ensure
Chair?
funding for the
Member
public
Davis, sure.
education system?
The separation there, the minimum school program is the majority, but the public education system support involves the 18% that involves things like our agency.
Is the question, Member Hymas, whether public minimum school program is included in public education system and therefore unnecessary? Is that?
Yes.
Is that Member Davis?
System support. I think the difference is you're thinking of
Support.
public education system versus support.
Okay.
Well,
Member Hymas, go ahead.
okay. Public education support by. Okay. That's,
System support.
thank you.
Member Davis, okay. Member Norton, and then I think we need to come to a vote on the amendment.
Yeah, the longer this goes, the more concerned I get. This includes a lot, an awful lot. And if constitutional language is broad and to be a timeless type of a statement, we did not hit the mark. If our legislators don't want us requiring things in the Constitution, we did not hit the mark. Yeah, I'm getting kind of concerned where we're going with this, and I think it is time to go, maybe take some votes.
Are you calling the question?
I'm
Or
calling
are
the
you-
question.
On the amendment.
Is there a
On the amendment.
second? There's,
I'll
is there
second it. I'll second that.
second? All in favor of calling the question? Member Bogus?
Aye.
Member Booth?
Aye.
Member Klein? Member Davis?
Aye.
Member Earl? Member Green?
Yes.
Member Hart?
Yes.
Member Hymas? Member Carey?
Yes.
Member Lear?
Yes.
Member Norton? Member Reel? Member Straight?
Yes.
Member Wood?
Yes.
And Member Moss is a yes. So the question is, Member Davis's amendment that the board replace, quote, establish a statutory framework that includes, unquote, with, quote, ensure funding for the minimum school program and public education system support by. We'll go backward this time. Member Wood,
No.
Member Straight,
No.
Member Reel, Member Norton, Member Lear,
No.
Member Carey,
No.
Member Hymus,
Yes.
Member Hart,
Yes.
Member Green,
No.
Member Earl,
No.
Member Davis,
Yes.
Member Klein,
No.
Member Booth,
Yes.
Member Bogus,
No.
and Member Moss is a no. So that motion fails.
And maybe for what it's worth, can I change my vote to it? Yeah. I'm being really difficult today. I'm
Yep,
waffling.
Member Lear is a yes.
Thank
then.
you.
Okay.
The body.
So that amendment fails. And so back to the underlying motion. And
And that's
do we
my-
have, speaking to
myself.
that, Member Lear?
I would like to make a substitute motion and then speak to it, please.
Let's hear the motion, see if it has a second.
I'd like to move to postpone for further discussion and perhaps vote a vote on this until at least next Thursday,
Just to clarify, next Thursday
this
meeting.
coming Thursday.
Coming Thursday. Is there a second to that motion?
I second it.
Get one of those? A
Either
second? Okay. Back to Member Lear, discussion of the motion, substitute motion?
Right, thank you. I'd like to do this for today. I'm not saying I wouldn't accept one of these with greater clarification at some later point. I think we need more information. I really want to hear what our education partners have to say about this. I'm very interested in the information that JLC expects to receive tomorrow. We heard from a legislator today that she would certainly like us talking to each other more than talking to her. And I've always said I want to align with what those people on the ground deal with, and those are our local board members and our superintendents. I think we have demonstrated to the legislature that we have now had, as somebody said a couple of weeks ago, a very robust discussion with various opinions. And I think we have demonstrated a sincere engagement and discussion. So I think that was important. I think there are still terms in this that are subject to interpretation. I'm still not satisfied that stabilization on its own means anything if it's not stabilized in relationship to something specific. I wanted to know about an inflationary index. Is there some capital, big I inflationary index, or is it something that someone establishes? So I think there are lots of terms that are, in my mind, unclear. Some board members are probably more trusting than I am, but I don't really put much stock in intent. I put a lot of stock in words on a page. And so I want to see the words that are either most favorable or ideally I could really support in this motion.
Okay.
So with that, I'd like to postpone it until at least next Thursday.
Okay, so we've got several lights on. I think we
This
have
coming Thursday.
Member Bogus, Member Earl, Member Straight, Member Hymus, and Member Carey. Member Bogus.
Chair, I will either make a substitute to the substitute or I will abstain.
Okay, no substitute. It's actually a motion to postpone is
would
technically
be
what we
a-
have on the floor.
that'd
It's
be
not a
yes,
substitute motion, but it's a motion to postpone. So, okay, Member Earl.
I kind of feel like we need to be taking something tomorrow. It doesn't have to be, it could be in draft form versus nothing, if that makes sense. Meaning that we can still postpone the actual affirmative vote. But I think there's been a lot of discussion already taken place and a lot of opportunity for information. I don't know, I guess that would, I don't know if I'd make an amendment to the.
I don't know that we can have an amendment to a motion to postpone. So
yeah,
we have
okay,
to rule on the
okay.
motion to postpone. We have member,
Go
did you
ahead.
want to?
Nope,
Okay.
I'm good.
We've got member Straight. Well, they haven't. Member Straight, member Hymus, and I'll just say, I think I'll just interpose here that my understanding is members of the education community are waiting to hear from each other. And so we've been talking to JLC and they've been talking to us, and the request is that we indicate somehow where we are. We don't have to do that today. That's, I think, part of the process. But member Hymus, no, member Straight, then member Hymus.
Thank you. You know, I think we're all looking for that magic formula, that special recipe. And whether it's our, with our own national constitution, a basic principle is that our constitution is only as good as the people and who the people elect to represent them. And we've been working through language and this word and that word and what does it mean? And in the end, what we come up with is only as good as our legislature and our school board and our school system and our people in general. And so, I too, there's lots of good minds out there. And when push comes to shove, I want to make certain that we're sticking together, the education community. And education is first and foremost the main priority of the state of Utah to produce good citizens. And so I'm not in a hurry today. As far as what you take tomorrow is we're unified, and we want to be unified with all of our educational stakeholders. And we're a part of that. We're a very important part of that. I absolutely will not and cannot shirk my responsibility, but there's no reason to rush, and there's still lots of unanswered questions. But the most important question, which I've now stated probably 4 times, is our alignment with the rest of the educational community. And I plan on continuing that effort to realign. I'm tired of waking up to this every morning, but that seems like what it's been for the last several weeks. And before that, it was 2:15. Oh, I said that word I shouldn't have. I hear we're not supposed to say that. Anyway, so I appreciate the motion, and I will support that motion.
All right, further discussion on the motion. We have member Hymus and member Davis.
Out of curiosity, I don't mind postponing, but what message does that send to the legislatures? I guess this is a question for you, Chair, as you go before them tomorrow. It's in my understanding, it'd be hard to say we're unified with nothing, right? We bring you nothing, but we are unified in that cause, right? That's what I don't seem to understand. So I'm kind of on the fence here. Like I get exactly what's being shared here, but at the same time, legislatures are asking us, what do you want? And we can't come together to give them something. And when we do, they say, I can't give you that. Give me something else. And we say, well, we're not there yet. We need more time. What message does that send back to them?
I'll say what they requested of us. And so that's not my position. It's just what they requested. We explained to them, and it was Superintendent Dixon, Deputy Jones, and myself, that our next regularly scheduled meeting was this coming Thursday. And their feedback to us was that things are moving quickly. That may be too late to weigh in. They want to hear from the education community, the USBA, USSA, the UEA, the governor's office have all been involved in these meetings. There hasn't been yet a position taken other than ours. So we did take a position. They're asking us to consider what they proposed and come back and express the will of our body. And they did say, they're looking to this board to state a position among other education partners as part of that discussion, I guess is the way I would frame it.
As the
I think
maker of the-
hold on. Member Lear, I think they're looking for input from everybody. Their request for this board was to go on record with where we stand and potentially do it in time to report tomorrow. That was the request. So go
Follow
back.
up, just
Yeah.
real quick, one more thought. So even if we went tomorrow morning and said, we're sticking to our guns, we want the max, right? Even though they said, no, you can't have it. Even if we went with that, that would still be better than saying, we're not ready yet. Because if we're not ready, we might miss it. But at least if we have a position, whether it's too strong for what they want, at least that sends a message saying, no, we want to secure public education funding. Even if we say we want the percentages, which they say we can't do, we want 50 to 75% of all of it to public ed. At least that's some sort of position, right?
That's a position we've expressed. They indicated it would not be able to pass their body.
I get it,
but it would be,
but it is a
would be-
position, right? It is
It would remain our position.
it is a voice from the board saying, yeah, we get that you don't think you can do that, but this is what we're asking for. Right.
That would remain our only board
Right.
voted position.
Right.
Correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm trying to keep track of the
Member Hart?
lights, but,
Okay.
Kelsey, are you
I
logged
show-
in somewhere? Where? Is your mic on? Are you waiting to speak? Okay, well, I'm seeing Kay James, so.
It's actually, I think it's that mic and it kind of has this.
Oh, there
Well,
we
I
go.
turned it on, but then you clarified what I was gonna say was the board
It
has
is.
taken a position
It
on,
is.
on February the
Thank you.
2nd and has passed a motion but what's being postponed today is trying to amend the February 2nd motion that was passed. So there is a current active position that the board has taken.
That would be our only position
That's
on
right.
record, and then we would indicate that we didn't come to any different position. And so that would be what we would report. I think we have member Lear and member Carey. I'm sorry, you don't show up on our, member Carey.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just would like to speak in favor of a member Lear's motion to postpone. Listening to Deputy Superintendent Jones, he was emphatic that, he's not in the position to give legal advice. And then we approached Brian to do the impossible, which is, come up with the language to amend the Constitution, and we give you 15 seconds. And I think that, again, given the gravity of the issue, I would just speak in support of the motion that we reach out to our education partners. To the extent Brian has the capacity to put up a one page on the language that he feels is best, that we spent quite a bit of time debating over public school systems. I think that would be very helpful, and I would rather have us postpone than show up without having fully vetted all the aspects of the issue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, member Carey, member Davis, and then member Lear, I think. Yeah.
I would echo every single thing that member Carey just said, and then I would also add to it that our current position is the one that we've already voted on, and that's the one that our board leadership would take to the meeting on Tuesday. And if we postpone this motion, then they would also be able to indicate to the folks in the meeting tomorrow that we are potentially working on another group of language. Also, Representative Peterson said this morning that really they are going to be learning some more funding issues the Tuesday after President's Day. And that's when they're really going to probably start moving faster. So I think we have a bit of time, but I would hate to move forward with some of these questions still lingering out there. So I would support postponing to Thursday.
Member Lear, were that for this or?
Yes, it is.
Member Lear and then member Hart.
As the maker of the motion, I wanted to respond to member Hymas somewhat about what do we take to the legislature? We take to the legislature that we have more questions than answers, that we have had a very robust and active discussion. We take seriously this responsibility. That's primarily what we take, that we can't haven't agreed on anything in terms of a motion since we agreed that we wanted strong constitutional language. Also, I'd say that Chair Moss made my point that we have taken many things to the legislature. We took two different versions immediately to Senator Milner and Representative Peterson. And it's been the legislature that said, nope, that's a non-starter. Nope, we can't do that. Nope, that won't pass our body. That's very different than not taking anything to the legislature. And I think just because, speaking for myself, I'm not taking something to the legislature that people are telling me they won't like, or that even individual legislators are saying they won't like, is different than not taking anything to the legislature. I think the art of compromise is both parties move somewhat. And I feel like we've offered several different scenarios, and we've been told with every one, that's not going to fly. So I absolutely think we need more time to process this. We've demonstrated good faith. And I think that's very important. And so I hope we can have a further discussion or vote on Thursday, this coming.
Thank you, Member Lear. Member, where are we? Hart?
Hart.
You're up.
That's me.
Yeah.
So I totally get it, and I do want people to weigh in, but why couldn't we do something like, I just want the process to keep moving forward. So why couldn't we consider making a motion? This is probably not legal, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Why can't we make a motion to have our AAGs and legal counsel look into blah, blah, blah? So that we're moving forward rather than just postponing it and going home.
And
Like the motion could be
I would consider that
review.
friendly
Yeah.
in terms of postpone, and in the meantime, have our assistant AGs look at definitions.
Right, so,
I'm fine about that.
so I just, how's that legal, Sybil?
I mean, we can do all that.
But
in-
I'm not going to vote
Well,
for,
let's
it's still a.
ask
sorry.
Sybil about whether this is.
I just
appropriate.
wonder, after we postpone, what are our
Well,
options?
and my point
Yeah.
is, that if it's an addendum to postpone, I will add that language.
Ah,
I will not add that language to this motion, because the legislature will hear, they support us and they're off and running. And we will never hear from them again. So
Right.
if you want to add that addendum, I would consider that friendly to the motion to postpone.
Is that the amendment, Member Hart?
Yeah, if it's legal.
To the motion to postpone,
Right,
yes.
So the amendment to the motion to postpone would be to postpone with direction to the AAG to do what?
two, that the board requests public education stakeholders and USBE AAG review the following, the following potential amendment to Article 10, and then we put in what we've,
Sorry,
That's not friendly. I find
That's-
if we go with an AAG, provide information or advice on definitions,
okay, that would,
then but I'm not going to suggest that I am supporting the underlying motion that I've just.
I just
asked.
want them to be clear on what they're reviewing for us.
And I think, I mean, I can define,
Just the items that we want defined by Thursday.
to the extent possible,
Yeah,
advice on language and definitions, including
stabilization was one of them.
stabilization. Does it need to be in language that they can find? Is it connected to something? Does
Right.
it need and then an inflationary index? Is that a capital I, or is it, or is it, is meaning it's a term of art, or is it whoever devises an inflationary index, then that's who we're subject to. Those are the two.
I think it
had.
just moves it
Member
forward.
Hart, does that meet you? What
I-
would, we're about 15, 16 minutes over. What's the proposed direction that we want to offer
It's up
as
behind
part
you,
of a
Joseph.
motion to postpone? Okay, so that's without objection. That's an amendment to the proposed motion to postpone. Any discussion to that? Oh, Superintendent Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if this is for Board Member Lear or not, but I'm trying to channel our AAG and feeling like this language boxes him in a little bit about what he's referencing. So in the earlier conversation, it was about what language can wrap most tightly around an insurance of protecting public education. And now I feel like this is asking him to define a couple of terms, which we could probably do. So I'm a little, I don't mean to speak for our AAG. I'm not sure this will get at what you originally said. I feel like it's now boxed in a little bit.
I note the word including, so that including is maybe something you're looking for. I think there was previous discussion about public education system and how broad or narrow is that. I may not be saying that perfectly, but I thought that was the gist of so those were the three things that I identified as the maker and receiver of the friendly amendment to that motion. But if he picks out other language in this motion previously that he identifies as problematic or ambiguous, I would also appreciate that insight.
Okay,
that
so just
legal
to
insight.
follow up then back to, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Sure, please.
So AAG Quisenberry, do you feel like including gives you enough leeway that you can come back with a broader, okay, thank you. I just didn't, thank you for that.
Okay, Member Davis, excuse me.
Yeah, I don't want him to be boxed in to only being able to study these things. I think we need general advice on the general constitutional language. So if this doesn't box him in and it's understood that he can give some support for that, that's fine. I also, on the language above, the maker of that original motion said what we did without, well, actually we incorporated that, I guess, into the amendment, never mind. But we may need to change that word from public education back to general support. So there are too many questions. I would support postponing. I would support the motion.
All right, any further discussion to that motion as amended? Member Straight?
Yes.
And Member Norton, I guess, as well. I actually had Bogus, Norton, and Straight, so
Oh, I'll wait.
let's be brief if we can. Member Bogus? Member Norton?
That I have a potential,
Substitute?
yeah,
I'm guessing. but
that
I
the
don't-
board
Sorry.
requests public education stakeholders and our.
Hold on, just one moment. Let me just see what's in order here. So we have an amended motion to postpone.
No, well, it's a motion to postpone.
Motion to postpone with a friendly amendment that was added without objection.
Right.
So is that, there is no second amendment to a motion to postpone?
Right, you cannot amend, you cannot substitute. It's just up or
Can't
down.
substitute on a regular.
This can be friendly.
Hold on. On a regular motion, you can have a second amendment,
Right.
right? On the motion to postpone,
No
you cannot have
amendment.
a second amendment. All right. Hold on, we're getting the ruling from the parliamentarians that on a motion to postpone, we can have only one amendment unless I suppose it's a friendly without objection. Is it that or is it a
I
substitute?
think it's a friendly without objection, but we'll see.
Let's-
Can I
let's-
add it?
Let's throw it out. We'll see if it's in order. I guess it depends on the nature of the.
Here we go. That the board postpones discussion on this topic until February 16th and requests public education stakeholders and USBE AAG review the following potential amendment, which is above. Amendment to Article 10.
That's not friendly.
Okay,
Sorry, I said you had a very narrow.
yes.
All right, so there is objection. parliamentary rules say that doesn't fly then. I'm sorry. So not in order. And we go back to the underlying motion. Member Straight.
Well, if I could just add, it's been
No, you can't.
stated, so if that happens,
kidding.
that'd be great. Anyway, uh,
I'm-
yeah, I'm backing off, but speaking to including, I would like some suggested language in that including part to define the legislative role to establish and maintain and the state board's role as general support and supervision. I heard someone during the opening education committee ask the question if there was any.
So I think you're speaking to it. Let's see first if
Oops.
that's a friendly and made without objection. It's somewhat expansive language. So
Say it's friendly.
Member Lear, is that a friendly without objection type of amendment? We've got
Definitions, yes, including stabilization and an inflationary index.
That's the
Okay, so what's your friendly then?
Just to add some including these other terms.
and what are the other terms?
Establish and maintain for the legislature and general support and supervision.
Yeah, those are friendly.
Any objection to the proposed friendly? Without objection, that's incorporated.
Let's go.
Okay. The
Okay,
holder of the motion does not object. Nobody else objects. We'll consider that a friendly. Okay, so
Can I
any
speak to it
further?
now?
Sure.
Okay, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Anyway, when I was attending the opening education committee meetings, there was a representative that actually asked that question if those terms had ever been defined in statute, and the answer was no. And I think it might be valuable to do so.
Okay, that becomes part of the proposed motion then. Any final discussion to that motion? Member Bogus, was your light on for that? Do we have Member Davis as well? Member Bogus?
No.
Member Davis? Member Davis?
Yeah, I would speak to the motion to postpone, and I would also ask our leadership just to keep this in mind when you go to the meeting tomorrow. I asked Deputy Superintendent Jones, and he said I could quote him. I said, does this draft motion that we're working on, what does this motion give us that we don't already have in 357? And he said, I can't see anything. It seems pretty consistent with what HB 357 already provides. So board members and leadership, as we discussed this morning and this week and come back on Thursday during this postponement, I think we need to think about that really seriously and figure out what it is we're asking the legislature to provide for the children of the state of Utah.
Thank you, Member Davis. If I could just add a follow-up. My understanding is that many of these terms are in 357, but would now be proposed to be put in the Constitution. And that would be the change. Is that accurate, Deputy Jones?
That's not my motion.
I'm asking, no, I'm not asking about the motion to postpone. I think the question was whether the language that's been presented is any different than 357. As I understand it, the motion that was on the floor before the motion to postpone was brought would take some concepts, not all, different language, and put them in the Constitution.
This motion
Member
asks,
Davis, is that?
no, this motion draft that we're looking at asks the legislature to create a code or a statute that talks about those things. It doesn't ask the legislature to fund those things. It's very different. A statute can be changed in 5 years. Constitution hopefully wouldn't be.
Right. This would put in the Constitution to tell the legislature to do certain things which are now roughly done in 357. And then the proposed, these are all subject to the motion to postpone, but I think currently we don't have any of the detail in 357 as a constitutional direction of the legislature. That's what's on the table. But the motion to postpone is now before us. So let's rule on or vote on that. And then if that, depending on how that goes, we'll come back at some point to discussion. So Motion on the floor is Member Lear's motion to postpone as amended, that the board postpone for further discussion a decision on the issue until February 16th and ask the AAGs to provide advice on language and definitions, including stabilization and inflationary index, establish and maintain, and general support and supervision. We'll go backward this time. Roll call vote. Member Wood.
Yes.
Member Straight.
Yes.
Member Reel. Member Norton. Member Lear.
Yes.
Member Carey.
Yes.
Member Hymus. Member Hart.
Yes.
Member Green.
Yes.
Member Earl.
No.
Member Davis.
Yes.
Member Klein.
Yes.
Member Booth.
Yes.
Member Bogus.
Yes.
Member Moss is a no. That motion passes by 13-2. And so we have postponed discussion. And that leaves, for clarity, the motion that this board previously approved, which we expressed to the legislature and will express again as the voted position by the board, and will indicate that we're under discussion as was voted today. So that will be the report that we make tomorrow morning to the legislature. Do you have a final comment or?
Motion to
Final
adjourn.
motion, motion to adjourn. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Thank you, members.